Hello, all of you tuning in on Facebook Live. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Joining me, as you can see quite clearly, former U.S. Vice President Al Gore. Thank you so much.
Tk you for doing this.
For taking the time.
Welcome, everybody.
We're going to try to get to as many questions as we possibly can because, of course, the reason we're here, An Inconvenient Truth came out,
11 years ago.
11 years ago. An Inconvenient sequel, Truth to Power, coming out in Canada
August 4th.
August 4th.
And you can get advance tickets at the website inconvenientsequel.com.
Right. So
hashtag be inconvenient.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Yeah, for all of you on social media. So hey, if you've got questions for the former U.S. Vice President, please start typing them in now. I'll try to pick them up on my phone. And so while you're answering, if I'm looking down at my phone, I hope it doesn't seem rude. I'm just trying to get as many questions as I can.
It's the new world.
But let me start things off. So, gosh, you think back 11 years.
Yeah.
I mean, so in your mind, what's changed in that time that made you think we need to do a sequel?
Well, there are two big changes. One is that the climate-related extreme weather events have become way more common, way more destructive. In my country, in the U.S., just in the last 7 years, we've had 11 so-called once-in-a-thousand-year downpours. The fires raging right now in your home, BC. Yeah. In my home country, more than 40 of them today. Sea level rise. I went to Miami and saw fish from the ocean swimming in the streets, and the Zika spread. There's a whole range of climate-related extremes that are really waking people up. The second big change in the last decade is that we now have the solutions to the climate crisis, and they're affordable now. The price of electricity from solar and wind has come down so fast, it's almost like computer chips, and it is like mobile phones and flat screen TVs. And it keeps on coming down in price. In many regions, it's now cheaper by a long shot than electricity from fossil fuels, and that's a game changer.
And yet, as all of that goes on, the United States has a president who is perhaps the fierce opponent of the fight against climate change that the world has today. How does that
there
that's
is
from within your own country?
And I tried hard to persuade him to stay in the Paris Agreement, and I thought there was a chance he would come to his senses, but I was wrong. And I was worried when he made his speech that other countries might also pull out, but in the aftermath, the entire rest of the world redoubled their commitments to the Paris Agreement, almost as if they were saying, we'll show you, Donald Trump. And in my country, so many governors and mayors and business leaders have stepped up to fill the gap. They're saying, we're still in Paris. They're going to meet the commitments, we all are, in spite of Donald Trump.
Do you think Trump is persuadable on this file?
If he asked me to talk to him again, I guess I would do it, but I'm not going to hold my breath. I think that he has surrendered to the climate deniers. That's my impression. I hate to think that about anybody, but I tried as hard as I knew how to, and he made the wrong decision, and I haven't talked to him since then.
You haven't, and no plans, as you say, in the
no
near
plans,
future
no.
to have a chat with him, to try to swing things the other way?
Nope. I'm done holding my breath for him to change his mind. I don't know how his mind operates.
We've got some questions, no surprise there. Let me start with this one, and I apologize here if I completely destroy your names in terms of pronunciations, but I'm going to try my best. Melina Yanciti asks, do we really only have 3 years left before the world gets too hot to inhabit? 3 years.
No. Now, there are so-called tipping points out there that we need to pay attention to. Some of the big ice sheets in Antarctica and Greenland are heating up, and the consequent sea level rise could be really extreme.
And some of the damage is not repairable either.
Regrettably, some changes will not be repairable. There's a big chunk of West Antarctica that the scientists, unfortunately, have concluded is past the point of no return, and that will build in some sea level rise that we don't want in the decades to come. But we still have the ability to avoid the most catastrophic consequences. The specific question was whether it gets too hot to survive. There are some scientists who say that there are some regions in the Middle East and North Africa that are close to a combination of temperature and humidity where they could become really uninhabitable in those regions. There was a city in Iran a couple of years ago that reached a combination of temperature and humidity. Do you use the phrase here in Canada about, it feels like of 74 degrees Celsius, 165 Fahrenheit? Yes. Wow. Nobody can survive for more than a few hours in those conditions. Sure. But thus far, those warnings are focused on just some regions in the Middle East and North Africa. Now that increases the refugee flow and the destabilizing consequences in places like Europe. And heat stress itself is an issue for agricultural crops, for people, particularly poor people, and the elderly and the very young and those with respiratory conditions. So I don't want to pass by it as not a very serious consequence, but we do have time, not all the time in the world, but we do have time to avoid the worst consequences.
This name I'm going to get right, 100%. Bronwyn Wood asks, how do we battle climate change when it's not about believing or denying the science, but about the ending corporate and political greed and corruption?
Well, it's a well-phrased question because the impact the science ought to have on all of us is muddled by a determined campaign by the large carbon polluters to try to intentionally confuse people. They're doing what the tobacco companies did years ago when the health link between cigarettes and lung cancer and other diseases was pointed out. They even hired the same PR firms. So we should hold them to account. But one of the beneficial effects of the Paris Agreement 18 months ago is that it sent a very powerful signal to investors, to businesses and industries. And we're now seeing a huge change in the business community. There's still some that are doing the wrong thing, ExxonMobil, the Koch brothers, you could run down the list, but they're fewer in number. And now there is really positive leadership coming from within the business community.
Got a comment here. Sean Spicer just resigned. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I just saw that. Apparently he objected to the new guy that Trump appointed, Anthony Scaramucci. I don't know. I can't keep up with the musical chairs in the Trump White House.
You don't miss the politics? Diving into it?
Well,
diving back in. That's the other thing people are wondering, right? 2020, run for president?
Well, let's take one question at a time. First of all, where Donald Trump is concerned, I think the next several months are going to be challenging for the United States because the investigation is clearly heating up. I don't know how this is going to end, but a lot of people think they know how it might end. And so we're going to go through some turbulent times in the next few months. Now, do I miss politics? There are a lot of things I don't miss about politics at all, but what I do miss is the ability to pull levers and push buttons and make things happen. I really enjoyed that when I was in politics, but forgive me for repeating myself, but I'm a recovering politician now, and the longer I go without a relapse, the less likely one becomes.
Okay, we've got a question from Patrick Keenan asking, specifically, is our biggest problem carbon emissions or carbon already in the air? And if so, how can we capture that carbon? Maybe more vegetation.
Yeah, the best technology we have for pulling CO2 out of the atmosphere is called a tree. And when you take it to scale, it's called a forest. The scientists and engineers are working really hard to come up with new ways that might make it possible to pull more CO2 out of the atmosphere. I'm on a jury to award a huge prize. Jim Hansen, Tim Flannery and I and some others. Richard Branson put up $25 million as a prize But so far, nobody's been able to come up with something better than a tree. We should keep trying. Now, the first part of the question, it is the total accumulation of CO2 in the atmosphere that matters. It now traps as much extra heat energy every day as would be released by 400,000 Hiroshima-class atomic bombs exploding every 24 hours. It's a big planet, but that's a huge amount of energy. So it is that accumulation that matters. But it also matters that we're adding another 110 million tons every single day. Now, we've stabilized emissions globally for the first time over the last 3 years. They're starting to come down in North America and China. So that's all good, but we need to move farther and faster.
We've only got about 10 minutes left, so if you've got questions, please type them in. Feel free to get them to me. This one coming in from Tina Xia, asking, can you expand on the, and this is in quotes, catastrophic consequences that you had mentioned just a moment ago? What do you think we should expect in the years to come regarding climate change?
Well, increasing temperatures. 16 of the 17 hottest years ever measured have been since 2001. The trend and pattern are very clear now. Now, this is also disrupting the water cycle because more than 90% of this extra heat energy is going into the oceans. That makes the ocean-based storms stronger, but it also evaporates a lot more water vapor from the oceans into the sky. That's why Canada and the US and other countries all over the world are having these record downpours. Just enormous rain bombs, they're calling them. And then naturally that causes more floods and more mudslides. And that same extra heat pulls the moisture out of the soil because there's a longer period of time on average between the downpours, more of the rain's concentrated in the one-time events. And so the droughts take hold quicker and they become deeper and stronger and more destructive, and that's hurting agriculture. And when the soil and vegetation dries out, we get a lot more fires with higher temperatures. The melting of the ice is raising sea levels. There will be an orderly retreat from a lot of low-lying coastal cities and towns and places like Bangladesh, and that's really going to be a challenge. And then it's disrupting the relationship between humans and microbes. You get diseases like Zika that we never heard of in North America. Now, for the first time in my lifetime, pregnant women are warned not to go to part of the United States. In parts of Central and South America, doctors astonishingly warned women don't get pregnant for 2 years till we get a handle on this. That should really set off alarm bells. And there are other consequences as well. I won't go through all of them, but it really is a terrible set of changes that we need to avoid. But let me hasten to add, we're seeing the solutions available now. What's missing is enough political will. But political will is itself a renewable resource. And I want to, since we're here in Toronto, I want to say that Justin Trudeau and the Canadian government was really instrumental in getting the Paris Agreement. It's a game changer. It really is beginning to drive fantastic solutions around the world.
Questions pouring in here, so I'm going to try to get to as many of these as I can. Robert Weeb asks, what can we say to climate change deniers to change their opinion?
First, seek to understand where they're coming from. If they've just been fed some of this phony information from the polluters, then you can try unwinding that. There's a website called skepticalscience.com that has answers to every single, they've got something like 200 varieties of climate denial with the answers to every single one of them. Now, there are some climate deniers where you may decide your time is better spent going on to the next person because some of them have a pretty hard shell. It's almost like a tribal issue politically now, and maybe is connected to some other things that have been going on. But over time, eventually the truth wins out. Truth can become the biggest source of power. Mahatma Gandhi believed that, and in all the great moral movements, civil rights, even gay rights, and more recently, when the choices are resolved into a choice between right and wrong, then the dam breaks. And I grew up in the South of the U.S., and the opposition to civil rights was just as strong, if not stronger, than the opposition to taking action on the climate crisis. And eventually, those who were dead set against it found in their hearts a way to change. And I see that happening on climate now.
This next question is about you, particularly. John Joseph Foe asks, how much energy do you use personally?
Well, I walk the walk. I don't just talk the talk. I drive a Tesla. I drive an electric vehicle. I have 33 solar panels on my house. I use no carbon-based energy. Sometimes, like to come here, I had to take a commercial airplane. I offset all of that, and some people, don't buy the offset thing, but it really does work. I planted 16,000 trees on my farm in Tennessee last year. I do all the things that I recommend other people do. I do walk the walk and not just talk the talk.
Here's a question from Josh Michael asking, what can a small country like Canada, do to reduce pollution and environmental damage around the world?
Lots of things. Shifting to renewable energy is a big deal. Accelerating the shift to electric vehicles, cars, trucks, buses, is also a big deal. Agriculture plays a role, shifting as many people are to organic, sustainable agriculture. Sustainable forestry is a very big deal, and those are some of the biggest changes.
We've got one from Mark Santos asking, from your experience in the U.S. administration, what can be done about all the corporate political corruption preventing some of the more advanced climate change solutions from reaching market?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and the movie explores this linkage between the climate crisis and the democracy crisis, not least in the U.S. Big money has way too much influence, certainly in U.S. Politics, and so I'm hopeful that the rise of social media, here we are on Facebook Live, will actually help bring about a change where the candidates for office don't have to spend all their time begging rich people and corporations for money to run their TV ads. We had a presidential campaign last year in the U.S. where one candidate, whether you agree with him or not, Bernie Sanders, he proved that you can run a nationwide campaign without any corporate contributions, without any big fat cat contributions, just relying on small contributions over the internet. I hope that becomes the future of politics because it has the potential to save democracy.
I think we have time to squeeze one more question in here. So this one comes from Cheryl Baxter. What is something that everyone can do to help fight climate change? I think many times people think they cannot make a difference.
Learn about it. Go see this movie. I mentioned the website, inconvenientsequel.com. It opens widely in North America August 4th, Canada and the U.S., select cities July 28th. A book of the same title comes out the same day. When you learn about it, then use that knowledge to win the conversations on climate. Somebody asked earlier about climate deniers. I saw in the civil rights movement how the conversations among friends on social networks that we now have, in the places where you work and social venues, if you win the conversation, then the laws and policies change.
Thank you to all of you who've been watching, who typed in questions. They were great, they were wonderful, informative. Mr. Vice President, thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, pleasure. Thank you, everybody.